November 10th, 1444. On the shores of the Black Sea, near the fortress of Varna, two armies stare each other down under a grim, leaden sky. One is a coalition of Europe's finest warriors, the last great Crusader army ever assembled. Their mission? To drive the Ottoman Turks from the continent for good. The other is the disciplined, seemingly unstoppable war machine of the Ottoman Empire, an empire that has been expanding its borders for over a century. For the Crusaders, this was meant to be a holy war of liberation. It was about to become a desperate struggle for survival. This was supposed to be the final Great Crusade, a last-ditch effort to push the Ottomans out of Europe. But now, this massive Crusader army finds itself trapped, with its back to the Black Sea, facing an enemy that vastly outnumbers it. How did they get into this mess? What followed was one of the most pivotal and brutal battles of the 15th century, a clash of civilizations that would decide the fate of Eastern Europe for centuries to come. So, how did it all come to this? To understand the disaster at Varna, we have to rewind the clock. The Ottoman Empire, once nearly shattered by the Mongol conqueror Tamerlane back in 1402, had made a stunning recovery. Under capable sultans like Mehmed I and his son, Murad II, the empire didn't just rebuild. It exploded back into the Balkans. By the 1440s, the Ottomans had pushed deep into southeastern Europe, and only the Kingdom of Hungary and its allies stood in their way. This is where we meet the key players on the Christian side. First, King Władysław III, the young ruler of both Poland and Hungary. He was ambitious, deeply religious, and felt it was his sacred duty to defend Christendom, eager to make a name for himself. Fighting alongside him was a living legend, John Hunyadi, the voivode of Transylvania. Hunyadi was a military genius, forged in the fires of the Hungarian frontier. He'd studied the revolutionary tactics of the Hussite Wars, blending heavy cavalry with disciplined infantry and mobile wagon forts. By 1441, a string of incredible victories against bigger Ottoman armies had earned him the title White Knight of Transylvania, a name that came from his shining armor and his reputation as a champion of the faith. And then there was the papal legate, Cardinal Julian Cesarini. A brilliant and persuasive churchman, Cesarini was the architect of this new crusade. He didn't just see the Ottomans as a military threat, he saw them as a spiritual crisis. For him, a victory could be the key to finally healing the split between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. In 1443, these three men launched the Long Campaign. With Sultan Murad II busy putting down rebellions elsewhere, Hunyadi led a Crusader army deep into Ottoman lands. They crossed the Balkan Mountains in the middle of winter, an incredible military feat, and smashed 3 separate Ottoman armies. Though bad weather finally stopped them, they returned to Buda as heroes. The myth of Ottoman invincibility was broken. All of Europe was buzzing with excitement for one last decisive crusade. A humbled Sultan Murad II sued for peace, offering shockingly generous terms. In the summer of 1444, the Peace of Szeged was signed. It was a 10-year truce that returned huge territories to Christian control and forced the Ottomans to pay a massive sum. The Long Campaign had been a massive success. Murad, known for being a man of his word, honored the deal completely. Believing his empire was finally secure, he did something almost unheard of. He abdicated the throne to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II, and retired to a life of quiet contemplation. But the ink on the treaty was barely dry when some of the Crusaders started arguing for betrayal. Cardinal Cesarini led the charge. He claimed that an oath sworn to a non-believer wasn't binding, and that this moment of Ottoman weakness, with a boy on the throne, was a gift from God they couldn't ignore. He pushed hard, insisting that King Władysław's original Crusader vow was more important than any political treaty. The young king was torn. He had given his word, but he also felt the weight of his holy duty. He was persuaded. Ignoring the loud objections of his own advisors, Władysław III renounced the Peace of Szeged just 2 days after it was signed. In September 1444, he broke his own treaty and led his army back across the Danube. The Crusade of Varna had begun, born from a broken promise. At first, the new campaign went well. The Crusader army, about 20,000 to 25,000 strong, pushed through Bulgaria, capturing Ottoman forts. This was a true European coalition army. Hungarians, Poles, Wallachians, Bohemians, and troops sent by the Pope. Their plan was bold. They would march to the Black Sea and meet up with a Venetian and Papal fleet that was supposed to be blocking the straits, trapping the main Ottoman army in Asia. The Crusaders figured they could then sweep through the Balkans without any real opposition. But the plan had a fatal flaw. The young Sultan Mehmed II, seeing the panic in his capital, sent a desperate message to his retired father. According to legend, the message was blunt. "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am the Sultan, I hereby order you to come and lead my armies." Murad's peaceful retirement was over. He came back to power and found that the Papal fleet had failed to block the Bosporus, allowing the Ottomans to ferry their forces across. In a brilliant move, Murad simply paid their commercial rivals, the Genoese, a huge fee to ferry his entire Anatolian army across the Bosporus. Suddenly, the whole situation was flipped on its head. As the Crusaders arrived near Varna, they were horrified to learn that Murad hadn't just crossed into Europe. He was marching right for them with a force of about 50,000 to 60,000 men. The hunters were now the hunted. Their path forward was now their only path of retreat, and it was blocked by a much larger army. The terrain around Varna became a cage. To the east, the Black Sea. To the south, impassable marshes. To the north, the steep Franga Plateau. And to the west, the entire might of the Ottoman army, closing in. There was no escape. The battle had to be fought right here, against terrifying odds. John Hunyadi, the brilliant commander, now faced his greatest challenge. He knew if they were surrounded, they were finished. He spread his army out in a long, curved line, hoping to use the narrow battlefield to cancel out the Ottoman numbers. On the right wing, near the lake, were the Wallachians and other Balkan troops. On the left, against the plateau, were Hunyadi's own Transylvanians, Hungarians, and Poles. In the center, Hunyadi placed the heart of the army, King Władysław and his personal guard of Polish and Hungarian heavy cavalry. And at the rear, he set up a fortified camp of supply wagons, a Wagenburg, to serve as a last line of defense. Across the field, Sultan Murad II set up his own forces perfectly. At the very center, protecting the Sultan himself, were his elite janissaries, professional soldiers trained from childhood, many now armed with early firearms and shielded by a line of ditches and stakes. On the flanks were his powerful cavalry, the Anatolian Sipahis from Asia on the right, and the battle-hardened Rumelian Sipahis from Europe on the left. Light infantry and horse archers filled the gaps, ready to harass the enemy. As the sun came up on November 10th, 1444, the two armies stood ready. The air was thick with the tension of thousands of men and horses. For the Crusaders, trapped and outnumbered, The only hope was a swift, brutal attack to break the Ottoman lines before they were crushed. For the Ottomans, the trap was set. All they had to do was spring it. The battle started with a calculated gamble by Hunyadi. He knew sitting back would be suicide. Their only chance was shock and awe. The Crusader right wing charged forward, their heavy cavalry smashing into the Anatolian Sipahis. The initial impact was devastating. The armored knights crashed into the Ottoman lines, shattering shields and armor. The Anatolians, not as experienced as their European counterparts, started to buckle. But then the Crusaders made a catastrophic mistake. Seeing the enemy run, the Christian soldiers broke formation and chased them down in a chaotic pursuit, hungry for loot and glory. This was a classic Ottoman trick, the feigned retreat. Just as the Crusader right wing became a scattered mob, the Anatolians who had been pretending to flee suddenly turned around. At the same time, fresh Ottoman reserves that had been hiding in ambush slammed into their exposed flank. In an instant, the triumphant charge turned into a desperate slaughter. Caught off guard and out of formation, the Crusaders were overwhelmed. Panic erupted as the entire right flank collapsed. Soldiers fleeing the chaos ran straight into the nearby marshes, where they were cut down without mercy. In the middle of this rout, Cardinal Julian Cesarini, the man who had preached this crusade into existence, was caught and killed, his dreams dying with him in the mud. From the center, Hunyadi watched the disaster on his right. He had to act fast. Grabbing his own cavalry, he launched a desperate countercharge, racing across the battlefield to hit the victorious Anatolians, who were now threatening the army's center. His disciplined attack smashed into their flank and stopped their advance for the moment. Then he got word that his left wing was also in deep trouble. Locked in a brutal fight with the elite Rumelian Sipahis, Hunyadi, leading from the very front, galloped to the other side of the battle and led another charge to save his embattled flank. He seemed to be everywhere at once, plugging gaps, rallying his men, and throwing the enemy back just when they seemed close to winning. For a little while, it looked like the White Knight might just pull off a miracle. The Crusader line had stabilized. The Ottoman flanks were in chaos, and Sultan Murad himself was left dangerously exposed with only his Janissary guard. It was at that moment, with the battle hanging on a knife's edge, that the fatal decision was made. King Władysław III, watching from the center, saw the Sultan's banner. He saw what he thought was a golden opportunity to win the entire war in a single glorious charge. Hunyadi had specifically told the king to wait, to let him regroup and finish off the weakened Ottoman flanks. But the young king wouldn't be denied his moment of glory. With a cry of, "For Christ!" he spurred his horse forward, leading his 500 elite Polish and Hungarian knights directly at Sultan Murad. It was a magnificent, terrible charge. The knights crashed through the first lines of Ottoman infantry, scattering them like leaves, and surged towards Murad's command post. But the Janissaries weren't just any soldiers. They were the Sultan's personal guard, the best infantry in the world, and they held their ground with unbreakable discipline. They had dug trenches and planted sharp stakes in front of them, preparing for exactly this. As the king's charge hit the Janissary line, its momentum shattered. Horses were impaled on the stakes, and the knights, now stuck and surrounded, were pulled from their saddles and hacked to pieces. In the heart of the chaos, King Władysław was unhorsed and killed on the spot. An Ottoman soldier cut off his head, stuck it on a spear, and raised it for everyone to see. The sight of their king's head on a pike broke the Crusader army's spirit. A cry of horror rose from the ranks. The will to fight just vanished. What had been a desperate defense turned into a full-blown, panicked rout. The battle was over. The Ottoman victory was absolute. The remaining Crusaders fled, chased down and slaughtered by the Ottoman cavalry. The field of Varna became the graveyard of the last Great Crusade. The Ottoman victory at Varna was total, but it came at a huge cost. Murad's army had taken such heavy losses that it reportedly took him 3 days to even realize he had won. The Crusader army wasn't just beaten, it was annihilated. It's estimated that over half of the Crusader force was killed, a catastrophic loss of Europe's military elite. John Hunyadi somehow managed to fight his way out of the slaughter and escape north. His reputation was damaged but not destroyed. After a brief capture, he returned to Hungary, where he would spend the rest of his life defending the kingdom. But from now on, he would always be fighting on the defensive. The consequences of the battle were massive. Varna marked the end of any serious, large-scale European effort to reclaim the Balkans. The dream of driving the Ottomans out of Europe was dead, replaced by a grim struggle for survival. With its main opposition shattered, the Ottoman Empire's control over the region was sealed. This victory had a huge psychological impact. It removed the last real hope of sending help to the struggling Byzantine Empire. And just 9 years later, in 1453, Sultan Murad's son, the same Mehmed II, who was just a boy in 1444, would lead his army to the walls of Constantinople. With no relief army coming from Europe, the city fell, ending 1,000 years of Roman history and establishing the Ottomans as a true world power. The fallen king was forever known as Władysław of Varna, his name tied to the disaster where he lost his life. Poland was left without a king for 3 years, throwing the kingdom into chaos. The Battle of Varna is a stark lesson in history. It shows how a brilliant plan can be destroyed by a single moment of pride, and how numbers and discipline can crush even the bravest warriors. It was a battle born from a broken promise and a thirst for glory, and it ended with a dead king and a shattered army. The victory here at Varna paved the way for the fall of Constantinople and sealed the fate of southeastern Europe for the next 400 years, ensuring the crescent, not the cross, would rule the Balkans. If you found this look into the Battle of Varna interesting, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest battles, and let us know in the comments which battle you want to see us cover next. Thanks for watching.